In the summer of 1456, the siege of Belgrade presented Europe with one of its most dramatic confrontations between faith and strategy. On the one side stood János Hunyadi, a seasoned military commander whose career had been defined by years of campaigns against the Ottoman Empire. On the other stood Giovanni da Capistrano, a radical Franciscan preacher whose faith had inspired thousands of peasants to march to the fortress with little more than farming tools in hand. Together, they represented two forces that rarely aligned: the calculated discipline of military expertise and the raw power of religious conviction. Their differences, however, did not prevent them from standing together at a moment when Europe's fate seemed to hang in the balance. Hunyadi, already aged and in declining health, had faced the Ottomans numerous times. His approach was methodical: fortify defenses, coordinate trained troops, and employ strategic counterattacks. He understood the limitations of manpower, the importance of supply lines, and the dangers posed by artillery and siege engines. Every movement was calculated. Every decision weighed against the realities of war. Retreat was considered only in absolute terms, and even then as a strategic pause rather than surrender. Hunyadi's life had been shaped by battlefield logic, and he approached Belgrade as he had countless other fortresses, with preparation, planning, and prudence. Capistrano, by contrast, relied on a different form of power. He had no formal training in military strategy, no understanding of formations or artillery. His authority came from belief and charisma. He preached that divine intervention could turn the tide of battle, that even the unarmed and unarmored could hold the line if their faith was unwavering. To his followers, prayer was as important as a weapon, and courage derived from conviction rather than training. In his eyes, the Ottoman advance was not just a military threat, but a spiritual one. Victory required both the defense of walls and the preservation of souls. From the outset, the relationship between Hunyadi and Capistrano was marked by tension. Hunyadi recognized the limits of faith as a substitute for arms. He was concerned that the untrained masses could become a liability, that chaos could break the lines, and that overzealous charges might provoke disaster. Capistrano, on the other hand, saw caution as a lack of faith. To him, hesitation betrayed divine purpose, and reliance solely on steel and strategy represented human weakness. Yet both shared a singular goal: the defense of Belgrade. This tension manifested in countless ways during the siege. Hunyadi focused on the fortifications, organizing his trained troops at key points along the walls, reinforcing weak gates, and preparing counterattacks against breaches. He coordinated artillery to target advancing Ottoman units and ensured that the limited ammunition and supplies were allocated efficiently. Each decision was a calculated attempt to maximize the defensive advantage of the fortress, minimize casualties, and delay or repel the attackers. Hunyadi's approach was grounded in the realities of warfare, informed by decades of experience. Capistrano, meanwhile, mobilized the masses with fervent sermons. He instructed peasants, refugees, and the dispossessed to stand firm, to pray without ceasing, and to consider death not as defeat but as martyrdom. Discipline was maintained through spiritual authority, moral codes, strict adherence to ritual, and the promise of divine reward for courage. The untrained volunteers held the walls, reinforced weak points, and filled gaps where professional soldiers could not be present. While Hunyadi worried about disorder, Capistrano saw commitment, and that commitment proved crucial in moments when the fortress's defenses were stretched thin. The clashes between strategy and faith were inevitable. Hunyadi sometimes attempted to restrain Capistrano's followers, urging caution to avoid unnecessary losses. Capistrano occasionally ignored these warnings, leading peasant volunteers into dangerous assaults against Ottoman positions. Experienced commanders criticized the risk, noting that enthusiasm could quickly turn into chaos. Yet, despite the friction, neither abandoned their post. Both understood that the stakes were too high to walk away. Belgrade was the gateway to Central Europe. Its fall would open the continent to Ottoman expansion. Compromise became a necessity, even when philosophy and methodology diverged. This uneasy alliance also had strategic consequences. The presence of thousands of untrained but motivated men allowed Hunyadi to stretch his defensive lines further than he otherwise could. While the Crusaders could not perform precise maneuvers, they occupied space, reinforced positions, and absorbed enemy attention. In effect, faith augmented strategy, providing a force multiplier that pure logic could not have generated alone. Conversely, Hunyadi's leadership ensured that the raw energy of the Crusaders was directed toward meaningful defensive action, preventing their zeal from turning into fatal recklessness. The result was a unique combination of forces, each complementing the other, despite underlying tension. Hunyadi's artillery targeted advancing Ottoman units, while Capistrano's volunteers reinforced walls, blocked ladders, and maintained morale through sheer conviction. When breaches occurred, professional soldiers engaged the enemy, but the presence of motivated volunteers ensured that collapse was avoided. Together, these two approaches created a layered defense that confounded Ottoman expectations. The psychological impact was equally significant. Ottoman commanders anticipated disciplined resistance or chaotic collapse, but what they encountered was both disciplined and unpredictable. The fortress held, in part, because defenders did not behave as expected. Hunyadi's trained units executed maneuvers precisely, while Capistrano's crusaders acted with unpredictable determination. The combination delayed the siege, inflicted casualties, and ultimately forced the Ottoman withdrawal. In hindsight, the tension between faith and strategy was not a flaw, but a feature of the defense. Hunyadi's pragmatism grounded the campaign in reality, ensuring survival and effective use of limited resources. Capistrano's faith mobilized an otherwise powerless population, expanded the defensive capacity, and maintained morale under extreme pressure. Both were necessary. Without Hunyadi, the fortress would have lacked professional direction. Without Capistrano, it would have lacked manpower and resilience. After the siege, analyses often highlighted this dynamic as a defining element of Belgrade's defense. Scholars noted that military skill alone could not have sustained the fortress against overwhelming Ottoman forces, just as raw faith without coordination could have resulted in disaster. The success of the defense was the product of a complex interplay between experience and belief, calculation and conviction. The legacy of this alliance endures. It is a study in leadership, cooperation, and the interplay of ideology and pragmatism. It demonstrates that in moments of extreme crisis, divergent approaches can converge toward a common goal. It also serves as a reminder that rigid adherence to one method, whether blind faith or purely rational strategy, may not suffice when stakes are existential. Belgrade's survival delayed Ottoman expansion into Central Europe, bought critical time for regional powers, and inspired subsequent generations. Hunyadi's strategic acumen and Capistrano's spiritual influence together created a defense that neither could have achieved alone. Their tension was real, but so was their mutual determination to protect the fortress at all costs. Ultimately, the siege of Belgrade illustrates that the collision between faith and strategy is not always destructive. When guided by a shared purpose, even opposing philosophies can create a complementary force, capable of withstanding pressures that neither could resist individually. Hunyadi and Capistrano, despite their disagreements, forged such a force, leaving a lasting mark on the history of European defense.